Smoky's heroics didn't stop at Luzon. Back at base, she became a daredevil, parachuting from 30 feet with a custom-made chute, her tiny ears flapping as soldiers cheered. She flew 12 combat missions, strapped to WWII's plane, earning 8 battle stars, more than most humans. Between battles, she entertained troops, learning tricks like playing dead or weaving through legs on command. Her antics kept spirits high in a war that crushed souls. But Smoky's impact went deeper. In makeshift hospitals, she'd visit wounded GIs, her soft fur and playful nips coaxing smiles from men who'd forgotten how to laugh. Nurses noticed patients with Smoky recovered faster, sparking the idea of therapy dogs, a concept still saving lives today. By 1945, her fame spread beyond the Pacific. Newspapers ran headlines like "Smoky the War Dog," and she even got a uniform, complete with a sergeant's stripe. Yet her bond with WWII stayed humble. She'd sleep in his tent, eat Spam from his rations, and once survived a kamikaze attack by hiding under a cot. As the war ended, WWII smuggled her back to Cleveland in a duffel bag, defying regulations. Smoky's wartime saga was epic, but could she conquer peacetime America? Her next chapter would prove she was more than a soldier, she was a star. Back in Ohio, Smoky's legend grew. WWII, now a civilian, trained her for shows, and she dazzled crowds with tricks like climbing ladders or tightrope walking blindfolded. By 1946, she was a TV sensation, performing on early broadcasts and earning $100 a week, big money then. Magazines dubbed her America's first therapy dog, and her story inspired veterans to share their own. But Smoky's biggest legacy was personal. For WWII, who battled PTSD, she was a lifeline, her loyalty pulling him through dark nights. She lived until 1957, dying peacefully at 14. Her grave in Cleveland is now a pilgrimage site for dog lovers and vets. Today, Smoky's honored with statues in Ohio and Australia, and her stories taught in schools. She didn't just save an airfield, she showed how even the smallest soul can change the world. So next time you hug your pet, think of Smoky, the 4-pound hero who braved a war and left a legacy of love. Want to hear more untold WW2 tales? Hit that subscribe button and let's keep history alive.
Years rolled by after the cheers faded and the lights dimmed. America had moved on from war to peace, from ration cards to rock and roll. Yet in one small Cleveland home, a man and his dog still carried echoes of the jungle. Bill WWII, now working as a photojournalist, often found himself staring at Smoky's medals, tiny badges of courage that once glittered under gunfire. The world was rebuilding, chasing dreams of prosperity, but few remembered the heroes without uniforms. Smoky, the little dog who had once crawled through enemy fire, now spent her days chasing butterflies in the backyard and curling up beside WWII's typewriter. Sometimes, when thunder rolled outside, she would lift her head suddenly, as if hearing the rumble of planes once again. WWII would smile softly, whispering, "It's okay, soldier. The war's over." But the war never fully left either of them. Nights were long, and the ghosts of the Pacific came uninvited. WWII had seen too much, the faces of men Smoky had saved, the ones who didn't return. Yet every time he felt the weight of it, Smoky was there, nudging his hand, grounding him to the present. To many, she was just a pet. To WWII, she was proof that miracles could wear fur. Together they visited hospitals, meeting wounded veterans who still bore invisible scars. Smoky would hop onto their beds, licking their faces, wagging her tail as if reminding them that they were still alive. "You see," WWII would tell nurses, "she doesn't just comfort people, she heals them." Those quiet hospital corridors were the real front lines now, and Smoky, though smaller and grayer, still fought her battles every day. By the early 1950s, the world of fame had shifted. Smoky's TV days faded into black and white memories, replaced by new stars and new wars. Korea raged on, and soon Vietnam would follow, But for the few who remembered, Smoky remained a symbol of courage without command, loyalty without question. When she passed away in 1957, Wynne buried her in a simple box lined with his old khaki handkerchief, the one that had carried her through air raids and foxholes. There was no grand military funeral, just a quiet goodbye under a maple tree. "You saved more men than most soldiers ever did," Wynne whispered through tears. Years later, when asked about her, he'd still choke up. "She was my best friend. My only friend sometimes."
Decades passed. The world entered the digital age, a time when heroes came in pixels and history lived in forgotten archives. For nearly half a century, Smoky's name was a faint echo, hidden beneath the roar of modern wars. Then, in the late 1990s, something remarkable happened. A group of veterans and animal historians rediscovered her story through Wynne's old photos and diaries. They were stunned. A 4-pound dog that had saved 250 soldiers, inspired therapy work, and pioneered animal-assisted healing long before science caught up. News outlets picked up the forgotten tale. Smoky the War Dog blazed across headlines once again, this time on the internet, not paper. Schools began teaching her story in history and psychology classes. Children wrote essays titled "The Dog Who Healed War." Statues began to rise in Cleveland, Australia, and even near the old Luzon airfield where her greatest mission took place. Each bronze sculpture showed her tiny frame with a wire in her mouth, frozen in courage for all time. Visitors often cried standing there, realizing that heroism doesn't always come in size or rank. Wynne, by then in his late 80s, attended the first dedication ceremony. When asked what he'd say to Smoky if she were alive, he smiled through trembling lips. Mission accomplished. But Smoky's influence didn't stop there. Her story inspired modern therapy dog programs used by veterans around the world. Today, thousands of soldiers recovering from PTSD or injuries owe part of their recovery to what Smoky once began, a simple act of love in a war zone. Every time a therapy dog comforts a wounded veteran, a piece of Smoky lives on. Her courage became a blueprint for compassion. In 2005, decades after her passing, Smoky's remains were reburied with full military honors. A crowd of veterans, children, and dog lovers gathered, waving flags and shedding tears for the tiny hero who had once been forgotten. As the bugle played taps, Wynne's family placed her old collar beside the memorial. She taught us that greatness doesn't bark the loudest. Sometimes it whispers through kindness, the priest said.
When the war ended, the world celebrated its heroes, generals, soldiers, and nations that rose from the ashes. But in a quiet corner of Cleveland, one tiny veteran wagged her tail, unaware of the history she had shaped. Smoky, the 4-pound miracle who once crawled through a 70-foot pipe under enemy fire, was finally home. No parades, no medals pinned to her chest, just peace, soft grass, and the steady voice of the man who loved her most, Bill Wynne. For Wynne, civilian life wasn't easy. The laughter of the battlefield brothers faded, replaced by the silence of memories. At night, he'd wake to phantom explosions, drenched in sweat, and there she'd be, licking his hand, grounding him back to reality. "It's all right, Smoky. We made it," he'd whisper. She was more than a dog. She was his link to sanity, his anchor in a sea of trauma. The same courage that once saved lives on the front lines was now saving one man's soul back home. Within months, Wynne realized Smoky's magic wasn't meant for him alone. He began taking her to veterans' hospitals, where wards were filled with wounded soldiers struggling to adjust to a world that had moved on without them. Smoky would leap onto their beds, lick their faces, and curl up beside their bandaged arms.
Men who hadn't spoken in weeks began to smile again. Nurses started noticing. Patients who spent time with Smoky healed faster, both physically and emotionally. It was the birth of something the world had never formally recognized before: animal therapy. Smoky became the first known therapy dog in history, and her little paws were quietly rewriting the rules of healing. Meanwhile, the world couldn't get enough of her charm. Smoky became a TV sensation in the late 1940s, performing tricks that stunned live audiences, walking tightropes blindfolded, climbing ladders, and even saluting like a soldier when the national anthem played. Every time she appeared on camera, viewers wrote letters saying, "We cried, we laughed, we needed this." After years of war, America found joy again in the unlikeliest of heroes, a Yorkshire Terrier who reminded them that innocence could survive even the darkest battles. But fame, like war, doesn't last forever. The years rolled by, new wars began, new heroes rose, and Smoky's story slowly faded into history's background noise. Bill Wynn never forgot her, though. Every medal, every photograph, every memory was carefully preserved, not as a trophy, but as a tribute. When Smoky passed away in 1957, Wynn buried her in a small box wrapped in his old khaki handkerchief. There were no headlines this time, just tears and silence. But in that silence, something eternal was born: the bond between man and dog that had conquered both war and time. For decades, Smoky's name disappeared. Her medals gathered dust, her photographs yellowed, and younger generations never heard of her bravery. But in the late 1990s, fate decided her story wasn't finished yet. A group of veterans stumbled upon Wynn's wartime journal and photographs, a treasure trove of forgotten heroism. Soon, news outlets rediscovered her tale. Smoky, the dog who saved 250 men, read one headline. The world fell in love all over again. Schools began teaching her story as part of history and psychology lessons. Statues of Smoky appeared in Cleveland and Australia, showing her tiny frame holding a communication wire in her mouth, immortalized in bronze. Veterans who once fought in Luzon stood with tears in their eyes, whispering, "We remember her." For many, she became a symbol of quiet courage, proof that true heroes don't always carry guns or wear uniforms. When Bill Wynn, now in his late 80s, attended Smoky's memorial service, he could barely speak. Standing beside her statue, he looked up at the sky and said, "Mission accomplished, soldier." The crowd fell silent. In that moment, Smoky wasn't just a war dog. She was a reminder that even the smallest life can leave the biggest legacy. Her spirit didn't stop there. Today, thousands of therapy dogs working with veterans trace their roots back to Smoky's example. From hospitals to disaster zones, dogs comfort the broken, calm the anxious, and bring hope to those who've lost it, continuing the mission she started in the jungles of the Pacific. Even modern pop culture began celebrating her. Documentaries, podcasts, and museums showcased her courage. Children visiting war exhibits point to her picture and ask, "Did that tiny dog really go to war?" And parents reply, "Yes, and she saved lives." Smoky's grave in Cleveland has become a pilgrimage site for soldiers, dog lovers, and history buffs. Visitors leave dog tags, flowers, and even toy bones beside her memorial. Some kneel, whispering a silent thank you. Others simply stand in awe, realizing that sometimes the greatest heroes don't walk on two legs. Smoky taught us that courage isn't measured by strength or size, but by heart. She faced bombs, bullets, and fear, and still wagged her tail. She comforted dying soldiers, cheered lonely hearts, and unknowingly built the foundation of a global movement that saves lives every single day.
So, the next time you see a therapy dog walking beside a wounded veteran or comforting a child in a hospital, remember Smoky, the tiny soldier who taught humanity what love under fire truly means. If this story moved you, if it made you believe in small miracles and forgotten heroes, don't let Smoky's memory fade again. Hit the like button if you believe courage can come in any size. Comment below, what's the bravest act you've ever seen an animal do? And subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications because next week we're bringing you another untold World War II story, one you've never heard before. Until then, remember Smoky, the tiny hero with a giant heart.